Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With me today is Daniel McAdams. Daniel, good to see you.
Good morning, Dr. Paul.
Well, very good. I understand you have a little announcement for us today before we start our regular program.
Yeah, we're going to try something a little bit different. You know, we appreciate our live viewers. We have so many, and the numbers increase every day, and we want to try to find ways to engage the people that take some time out of their day to watch our program.
Right.
So we're going to try at the end of the show to take some questions from the comments that people leave. I'll try to pick some good ones out and throw them at you and see what happens.
Uh-oh. We can't be prepared, huh?
Hot seat, yeah.
Okay. Well, we're going to be talking today a little bit about what went on yesterday because the financial markets were very, very active, and they weren't reacting the way most people predicted, especially the people at the Fed and the Wall Streeters, and they didn't follow the rules, and they were wringing their hands, what's going on? But yesterday, the Fed did exactly what everybody expected, and that was they raised the interest rates 1/4 point. And it's been a consensus for years now that interest rates have been too low too long, and down to essentially zero. They've been realizing that they have to raise interest rates. So they've raised them 3 times, though, in the last year, 1/4 point each time, not even a whole percent during this time. And that's over the past 11 years, they haven't dared raise interest rates. But I think what this does, it calls attention to the fact that the Federal Reserve really is pretty inept. They're economic planners. That's the major instrument for planning our economy. And they work on the Keynesian belief that wealth comes from creating money out of thin air. If you create money and easy credit and low interest rates, people will do certain things and the economy will grow. They work also on the assumption that that economic growth and the downturn is a consequence of free market economics, which is not true. Who creates the business cycle? Well, it's the Federal Reserve. But they blame it on the market for their excuse to come in and manipulate the markets either up or down, and they don't do a very good job. And I think yesterday was an example of a lousy job and pointed out some of their shortcomings because the reactions were almost opposite of what they had expected. For instance, when you raise interest rates, generally speaking, people think, well, you can get more interest on your dollars that you have in the bank, and the dollar is an important currency. But that didn't happen. The dollar went down 1%, which is significant for one day. And ordinarily, you know, when interest rates go up, they claim, which I don't believe, that interest rates rise, and that hurts gold, and gold will go down. Well, gold went up significantly so. They have forgotten the fact that when interest rates were skyrocketing in the 1970s, that's when gold went from $35 an ounce up to $800 an ounce with rising interest rates. And ordinarily, in the past, when the Fed was manipulating the economy and there is a recession that they created, they said, all right, it's all over. I remember 1982, they had to have a wringing out type of recession from the boom inflation of the 70s. So it was announced policy, well, now we're going to lower interest rates. But raise interest rates. And when you raise interest rates, the general consensus is that the stocks will go down. Well, yesterday, the stocks skyrocketed to record highs. So things aren't working out so well, and they're sort of wringing their hands. But I don't think it's working out very well because they're working on a false notion that they have control, that they are significant, and all they do is manipulate things, building bubbles and setting the stage, you know, for these corrections. So I think that's what we're witnessing now, Daniel. This whole thing is emphasizing that Keynesian economics doesn't work, inflationism doesn't work, central banking doesn't work, and but you can't give up on that because there'd be problems. They might worry about who's going to pay for the debt and this sort of thing.
Yeah, there was an extraordinary moment yesterday at the news conference with Janet Yellen, and we saw this on Zero Hedge, of course. But Bloomberg TV's Kathleen Hayes kind of had an emperor has no clothes kind of question. Maybe I can just throw it at you a little bit because everyone else was applauding the Fed's decision, and she here's what she had to say. She was asking this to Janet Yellen. GDP is tracking very low. Measures of labor compensation are not threatening to boost inflation anytime fast. Consumer is not picking up very much. Fiscal policy, we don't know what's going to happen with Donald Trump, and yet you have to raise the rates now. So what is the motivation here? The economy is so far from your forecast in terms of GDP. Why does the Fed have to move now? What does this signal then about the rest of the year?
Well, this demonstrates the fallacy of this economic planning in that they do know. Sometimes people ask me, what should you do? What would you do? Would you raise them or lower them? Well, in a free market, you don't even have to think about that. But I think she hit the nail on the head. If she was sort of speaking from, an interventionist viewpoint, you're interviewing, but you're not following the rules, and why are you doing this? And this might cause a downturn. But she is right. Real wages are down right now, and they're down, more sharply than the GDP. Debt is skyrocketing much faster than the GDP, and there's evidence now that department sales are down and restaurant sales are down. So there's a lot of sign of weakness. So this is a lot different than 2008. A lot of people think, well, when we have this bust again, they keep thinking of the last recession. But I think it'll be different. I think there's signs now that we're more likely to have stagflation or a inflationary depression, because we see prices going up, consumer prices and producer prices, more than they want to admit, and they don't really have any tools left. So I think we're going to see prices going up because we see them already creeping up, but gold is a signal too. If the people who buy and sell gold looked at this and say, hey, you know what, this is going to be good for the traders in gold, so gold goes up $30, this sort of thing. So I think she was absolutely right from their interventionist viewpoint, that they're not even following their own rules, and they're just sitting and crossing their fingers, and Yellen keeps saying, nothing is locked in stone. We can change our mind anytime we want, which is absolutely true. And then they wonder why there's uncertainty. The only thing that is a little bit baffling to a degree, and that is the exuberance in the stock market. And that comes from, it's not like it's fiction, because it's based on hope that Trump will accomplish, some of the things that he says, the good things, not the increase in the deficit and not war and things like that. But he's claiming that he'll spend money on military, stimulate the economy, spend money on infrastructure, and he really is not worried about the deficit. And the markets look at this and say, this looks pretty good, along with cutting taxes. So if you if you increase spending in certain areas and you don't really cut anything, he lists the things he might cut, but this will lead to better times. And people, I think the Trump euphoria is a market reality, but just as fast as it came, it can leave as well. This is what is unpredictable. Just as all these reports yesterday didn't fit the model. I mean, and I saw one report, that's not our model. Our model said this, and they bet a lot of money on this too. And that, of course, the answer to that, of course, is what Mises teaches, is that you can't predict human action. You can't predict what people will do with their money. You give them back some of their own money, you say, well, that'll stimulate the economy. Well, they might pay off debt. And you don't know maybe, they'll spend it overseas or something. There's no way they can predict human actions, and this is what's coming in. Generally speaking, the markets have reacted in a somewhat predictable manner over the years. The Fed would create bubbles, then they would deflate the bubbles, and then they would get interest rates lower. But they never look at the real problem of the misinformation they get from trying to find the right interest rate. And that's what this whole story was about. They don't know the right interest rate. They're just guessing at it. And the other thing is, it encourages too much debt, which we talked about, and it also encourages something that people don't talk about a whole lot, and that's the malinvestment. Because if you combine low interest rates that make business people do the wrong things at the wrong time, and also Congress contributes in it as well. You know, they might direct more of the money into medical care. That doesn't mean you get more medical care. You might end up getting higher prices in medical care. Same way with housing bubble, with Community Reinvestment Act. So the money is loose and the housing boom is going, and then the Congress comes along. You must loan money to people who are risky lenders, borrowers. So it's just doomed to fail, and I think this is a sign that they never did have much control, and they're going to lose a lot more. And there's going to be some real surprises. And the one surprise that I sort of lean strongly to is that there will be a lot of inflation for all prices. At the same time, the economy will be weak. They might call it stagflation. We didn't have a recent depression. It was just a super recession. In the same way with this. They're not going to call it, an inflationary depression, but that's possible. And the worst scenario for that would be things like Zimbabwe and Venezuela. Right now, we're not on the verge of that, but it's conceivable. I mean, paper money can self-destruct in a major fashion, and everybody suffers.
You know, we've talked a lot about real news versus fake news on the show, and these things that you're reciting are obviously from your years and years of research. We turned to Zero Hedge. We have this Bloomberg account of the problems. Why are they doing it now? But out of curiosity, I flipped over to the Washington Post, and they had a very different take. Here's what their headline was: Fed raises rates amid signs of a strengthening economy. It had a quote from Janet Yellen. The simple message is that the economy is doing well.
Yeah.
So it reminds me of 07 when you were warning about the housing bubble, and everyone said, you're crazy, it's fine.
Everything is wonderful. And yesterday I was on one of the shows, and they interviewed me, and I suggested it was a lot of trouble. And no, that's not the case. Things are looking real good. And it turns out that we don't know exactly when the correction will come, but it surely will. Now, Gary Kahn, the new economic advisor for Trump, had a comment about the Fed, and he said the Fed is doing a very good job. And so I don't think that there will be changes in Fed policy under the new administration. I think it's going to continue exactly the way, because Trump has said that he has tremendous respect for the Federal Reserve. This, to me, will be the big issue.
Okay, well, we do have a couple of questions if you're ready to handle a couple. The first one comes from Derek Miner, and I think it's a good one. I think a lot of people are wondering this. He said, I hate the Federal Reserve too, but isn't raising it 0.25 a good thing?
Well, the market, if you allowed the market to determine interest rates, it would go up a lot more than that. It's an impossible thing to pick the right thing. Yes, the direction is probably the right thing to do. Allow to get back to a more sensible thing. But they're locked into a problem. They're saying they're raising interest rates. At the same time, what she said yesterday is we won't allow the overnight lending rate to go up, the Fed funds rate. She's going to control that, which is, which is the benefit for the bankers. It's a subsidy to bankers that they can always borrow at what she says is going to be, claiming that keeping interest rates very low and beneficial to the banks, she can regulate things with the overnight rates and ignore the others and let the 10-year bills go up and maybe 30-year bonds and things that will rise. But yes, if you were looking for a hint of the Fed going in the right direction, they should have never lowered them to 1%. But I just don't like to get in this thing of tinkering around and saying, well, I don't want to endorse the system. It's the system that's wrong, and they shouldn't have lowered them. And since they are too low, I guess going in that direction is the right direction, but it's not necessary to solve the problem, and I think this is why the reaction is so confusing, because it's not a market effect. I mean, this is created once more by the Fed. I mean, the amount of time that the financial markets concentrate on what will the Fed say or do. One word yesterday was key to this whole thing, and they just look at this. That is so far removed from the marketplace, and that's why you can't get a straight answer or know what to expect next week or next month.
Yeah. Here's another one that is interesting. It's Brent ANCAP. I like that name. The Obama recovery has taken 7 years and it's still bad. How long would a genuine recovery take if the government didn't interfere with the liquidation process?
Now that's a good question, because that's the key to it. And that individual probably knows a little bit about the Depression of 1921. Yes, stagnation is what Obama had, but I believe that the stagnation will continue. I don't think the liquidation will occur, because that's the way you get economic growth again. But the big problem is there's nobody that's going to permit it. The Fed won't permit it. The members of Congress won't permit it, and because it's painful to go through. It's sort of like trying to get somebody off drugs, and going cold turkey on that isn't very pleasant. So an economy would probably be in very bad shape to allow the correction to occur. But if we'd allowed that to happen in 2009 and had the liquidation, which they did in 1921, it was over in a year. But GDP would not limp along and pretend that it's growing at 1% and fudge the figures and try to hide it. That makes it a chronic thing. This is what Japan had done, not allow the liquidation. And we're now at that point, too, of not allowing liquidation. But that is what should be done. If we're going to restore soundness, it would have to be in collaboration with spending. You could go back on a gold standard. You could have the liquidation. You could say we're not going to run a welfare state. We're going to quit fighting all these wars. And everybody knows it's too much for people they get hysterical over this. But that's the only way you're going to get back to economic growth. Japan's been looking for a way for 20 years. And things weren't quite as bad, but we started all this mess in the 30s. And it took all the 30s and World War II to rearrange things, liquidate the debt, and then they went back to economic growth again. And that's what we're doing now. I mean, it's still the past 8 years have been horrible. And these statistics shows that it's a very weak economy, much weaker than anybody wants to admit. The GDP is just, not growing. I mean, debt is growing tremendously, but not the GDP.
In fact, we have a great chart that shows this. We talked about this before the show. The red, of course, is debt, and the green is GDP growth.
Why I think this is a magnificent chart. It proves my point, and it's a great picture, because the interventionists, the planners, the Federal Reserve, the Keynesians, the big spenders, the people who believe in debt, believe in the red line that is the salvation. This is what you do. You print money and you pay all the bills, but guess what happened? Debt goes up, but they don't get the growth. It isn't translated into growth, and that's what that green line. There's no the growth isn't there. It's very puny, and it'll continue until they change their method. The debt line is going to continue to go up, and toward the end of a currency, I mean, it just goes up, and that's when prices start to skyrocket and lose control. People say, well, when's that going to happen? Nobody knows exactly when it will happen, because once again, it has a lot to do with individuals making decisions. And if right now they don't feel like they want to go out and spend as much on certain things, it may last for a while. But ultimately, that chart proves that you can't get economic growth just by printing money. So what will happen is that debt. And, again, that's associated with real wages. That also explains why real wages don't go up. What happens is that line, the red line, is going to go up straighter, and the green line is probably going to turn down, and GDP will go down. And right now, there's some prediction about GDP. The recently one at Atlanta showed that the GDP is, and I think that was mentioned in those hearings yesterday. The GDP is not very strong at all, and it isn't reliable either, because the irony of the GDP is that if government decides to spend, and Trump wants to spend a lot of money on military, that'll help the GDP, but he'll be buying more drone missiles and dropping them over on people and blowing them up, and yet that added to GDP. In contrast, if you took that money, you have to ask the question, instead of what? Where would that money be? It would have been left in the pockets of the people. They might have been able to afford their health care or something like that. They might have been able to afford education for their children. But that's sort of the unseen that is difficult. But right now, I think the trend doesn't look real good, and that this raising, they're talking about 3 or 4 more times this year to raise interest rates. I just don't think that's going to happen. I think reality will set in, and they say, "Oh, looks like the market doesn't like this," and they'll go back to removing this token effort, which means hardly anything of a 0.25%, and thinking that's going to solve our problems. It's not going to do that.
I know we've got a lot of charts today, but you mentioned military spending counting as GDP. We have a great chart here that we got off of Zero Hedge of Trump's proposed budget, the cuts and the plus-ups. Yeah. And look at this, the cuts, big cuts, this is what he claims: Health and Human Services, AID, education, HUD, agriculture, all good, all good. Then you go down toward the bottom, look at the defense budget, look at the gray line.
Yes,
it's incredible.
And the only way the Congress can get away with this is you have to terrify the people, scare them to death that we're about to be attacked, like Saddam Hussein's coming. He's going to drop a nuclear missile on us. And now we have to be terrified, and that's the name of the game, and they work on this all the time. Unfortunately, I can't think of anything real positive to say about that, because the cuts aren't going to happen, and the people who want those cuts are very sincere. The people who voted for Trump and a lot of conservatives in the Congress want it, but it's not going to happen. And those the spending will happen. That's the way it's been for a long time. And there's one factor on why they could possibly continue to do this for a while longer until the whole thing implodes. And that is, there's a Federal Reserve System. Without a Federal Reserve System and sound money, you're limited. You can't print money out of thin air. It restricts the politician. The politician can't buy votes by going to his district and say, "What do you need?" "Oh, you need to build this part for the F-35, and this gives you military jobs. You won't cut that, will you?" "No, we're going to build more F-35s and more helicopters." I see they're building the most expensive helicopter ever now. So everybody will say, "That's good for jobs, isn't it?" And that circulates the money, and that is all good. So I would say that this isn't going to work. The spending cuts won't occur, and the spending increases will, and we're going to continue to limp along.
So no guns without the butter.
There you go. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today to the Liberty Report. I think this is fascinating information and a subject because the Federal Reserve is key and it's very important. We have a lot of support, for Campaign for Liberty, for auditing the Fed. And it is that function, which was started in 1913, which has undermined our economic system. It has undermined, the whole process. And it destroyed the gold standard, and it ushered in an age of exuberance, of printing money and running up deficits. But believe me, if it were so easy that all we had to do was get monopoly control, not only on our own monetary system by people who want to spend money, but on actual control worldwide by running the reserve currency of the world and pretending that we're spreading American goodness. As long as that exists, they're going to keep doing this. But it is results from this fallacy that creating money has something to do with creating wealth. It doesn't. Creating wealth means people have to work, they have to save, and they have to invest, and they have to suffer consequences if they make mistakes. And you cannot have runaway welfare and runaway warfare and think a country can get wealthy. This is what has destroyed most nations and most empires throughout history. It is the destruction of the monetary unit as well as overextension in foreign policy. And believe me, we're facing the consequence of that type of policy. So hopefully we will wake up some people. I know on my travels that I meet more and more people, a lot of young people who know exactly what's going on, but their voices aren't heard and they're not getting to express themselves. All they want to do is show the Bernie Sanders rallies and said, every young person in this country now wants socialism. Well, I don't believe that. There's a lot of people there, and it's a growing number, who want their freedom back and want to take care of themselves, and they want to mind their own business, and they would like to see a system of sound money, and they'd like to see a system and a policy where we didn't go around the world looking for wars to fight. Those conditions would usher in a period of time of peace and prosperity, which certainly should be the goal of all Americans. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today. Please come back soon.